a lot of us who go into healthcare, we're givers. We're going into this because we are really pouring our heart. We want to help. Imagine when that's not the forefront of your mind anymore, but the forefront is, did I offend somebody with my tone? Did I effectively communicate? It's a lot of pressure. So that, of course, leads to burnout.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Frustrated to Fluent. I'm your host, Devon Bruce, and we help non-native English-speaking healthcare professionals communicate effectively so that way they can thrive in their careers. And today I have an amazing guest. Her name is Dr. Tamara Beckford. She is a board-certified emergency medicine physician, author, speaker, and CEO of You Are Caring Docs. With over 15 years of experience, she has dedicated her career to helping others avoid and overcome burnout. And as language learners, we all know that burnout is real. And so her passion for wellness and personal development has inspired countless women to take control of their lives and thrive. So, Dr. Beckford, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you about this.
Thank you so much for having me. I cannot wait to be able to pour into your audience.
Thank you. Thank you. The reason why that I wanted to talk to you about this today is because I recently made an article on LinkedIn about language burnout and how that affects people mentally and emotionally. And I also just recently had a conversational English practice just about burnout in healthcare. And that was an amazing conversation. And so it's a big issue, especially for non-native English speakers, because their inability to communicate effectively really exasperates burnout. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this. But before we really dive deep into this, I just want to ask you, can you tell us a bit about your journey and what inspired you to specialize in helping doctors overcome burnout?
Absolutely. So I am, as you mentioned, an emergency medicine physician. I myself am an immigrant. I grew up in Jamaica. We moved to the United States when I was around a tween, around 11 going on 12. So, I mean, Jamaica, of course, is an English-speaking country, but I do understand the nuances when you speak English, but you're speaking English, but those who speak English are still not understanding you because of just little nuances that happens within the language. Grew up in New Jersey, went to medical school there, and did my training in Philadelphia, and moved to Houston, Texas. So I've been in Houston now for almost 15 years and work as an ER physician in addition to everything else that we mentioned. So with burnout, the reason I really started specializing in burnout was a couple folds. For those who are in high achieving professions, after a while, I mean, it takes a long time for you to get to the pinnacle of your profession, to even start. Around 15 or so years of hard work and consistently working. Now, once you've gotten there and you're working for a while, you kind of get to a point where you're like, is this all that I am meant to do? You have this drive to go a little bit further. And going on around 9, 10 years into my field, I started to feel this urge to give more and to be able to do more. That brought me to a lot of self-development, podcasts, books, started reading more, got into reading, Tony Robbins, Mel Robbins, Zig Ziglar, and all these other personal development people. Little did I know that I was really building myself up for 2020, which was when the pandemic started. And when the pandemic hit, as an ER physician, you can imagine that it would have hit very hard for those in my profession. A lot of my colleagues started to burn out even more faster. The anxiety, the unknown, there's so many factors that, contributed to that. However, instead of burning out, I began to thrive during that time. And it's unusual. And therefore, I started to do a little more introspection as to why is it that I am thriving during a time when I should have been burning out. What I realized is that all the work that I did in 2019 is what prepared me to be able to thrive in 2020 and beyond. And therefore, as most people who have learned how to overcome something, you don't want to hold it and keep it to yourself. You want to be able to share these strategies, these techniques, these tools. And that's what made me decide, say, okay, I have to share these tools with others to be able to help them to overcome and or even recognize some of these facets of burnout within their lives and be able to thrive also.
Wow, that's amazing. I love how you took, first of all, you did the work on yourself. And then when the pandemic hit, you realized that you had this amazing gift of thriving in all of this chaos. And then now you're using that experience to help others. That's
Absolutely.
amazing. That's commendable. This is why I love working with people in healthcare, honestly, because you are so helpless when it comes to wanting to help people. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The call to be of service is so high. And that's why I love helping the helpers. So thank you for doing what you're doing, because I know, like I said, as someone who just had a conversational English practice about burnout in the medical field, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you so much for what you do.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you. Now, let me ask you this. Now, what's one myth about burnout that you like to debunk? Because I feel like sometimes people think it's this like big, chaotic, major blowout light bulb moment,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like I've learned it may not come across that way. So, what's one myth about burnout that you often have to debunk or you'd like to debunk?
Absolutely. Great question. One of the myths about burnout is that we think that burnout just happens in a snap. Like, oh, I've been feeling fine. And then one day, boom, I'm burnt out. But burnout actually occurs in phases. It's a slow onset. And once you get to the depth of burnout, you're kind of deep. It is reversible one at certain phases of it. But once you get to the crisis phase, then there's a transition that can occur over to the mental illness state. Now, another myth is that burnout is a psychiatric condition. By definition, the World Health Organization has separated burnout from a direct mental illness. It's by its definition, it's a chronic psychological condition that is brought on by chronic workplace stress. So at times we have multifactorial issues that bring on burnout, but by its definition, by its true definition, is brought on by workplace stress. So those are a couple things that, we use the word loosely, but we do want to keep in mind when we're thinking about how to overcome some of the challenges. And when we're thinking of it in its definition relates to chronic workplace stress.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. Now, I would like to ask you this because some people might think this is a like a question that everyone knows, but I really don't think so. So let me ask you this from your perspective as someone who specializes in burnout, why do you think burnout is such a common issue in healthcare, especially for non-native English speaking healthcare workers?
Can be a huge factor within healthcare for non-native English speakers because it's an additional stressor that's going on. Now, healthcare within itself comes along with its own set of stress. Now, imagine having to deal with all of that, and then communication is a huge part of healthcare, being able to communicate with your colleagues, being able to communicate with your patient effectively, and even within the environment. When you are doing your best at communicating, and communication is also a two-way street. When you speak, your body language, your tone, there are so many factors that attribute to being able to effectively communicate. When you have to implicitly think about every single step of that form of communication, you can see how that adds an additional layer of stress. I'll liken it to this for those who are in healthcare. When the pandemic started, one of the things that we had to do was to wear our protective gear, which is our PPE, right? Personal protective equipment. Now, on a regular basis, prior to the pandemic, there were situations where we did have to wear those PPEs. And if we had patients who, for example, had tuberculosis, when you went into the room, you placed the gear on, you went in, you effectively took care of the patient, and then you came out. But each step of that, it required for you to think. We're not going to, quote unquote, cross-contaminate. When I place this item on, I have to think and make sure I place that item. And each step, you had to consciously think about the steps, right? To keep them in mind. It wasn't just like going in the room and coming out like you would do on a regular basis. You had to consciously think about the steps. Now, when you are having a non-native English speaker, and especially when you have already told them like your tone is this way, your that is that way, you haven't, then now that person has to consciously think about every single step of their communication pattern when they're entering into the room, when they're communicating with their colleagues, when they're communicating with their supervisors. That's a lot of stress. I recall when I had to keep remembering how to put on the PPEs. Did I do that? Did I do this? Oh my gosh. There are two steps. You place that on, you add the cleaning equipment, you place the other step. Did I miss one step? Can you imagine? That's your day-to-day consistently. That adds multiple layers of stress. And not only that, as you mentioned, a lot of us who go into healthcare, we're givers. We're going into this because we are really pouring our heart. We want to help. We want to see effective change. We want to see improvement in mankind, in our patients. Imagine when that's not the forefront of your mind anymore, but the forefront is, did I offend somebody with my tone? Did I effectively communicate? The heart portion of medicine starts to get dampened, and that person's livelihood, their calling, their drive, it starts to become questioned. And that's a hard thing for someone who this is their passion. These are all these years of hard work in order to be able to help others. And something like, well, I didn't like the way you said that to me, takes all of that away. It's a lot of pressure. So that, of course, leads to burnout.
I love that you said that because you're absolutely right. And that's why I love what I do, because sometimes people are like, well, what's the big deal? It's just English. And it's like, yeah, no, it runs way deeper than just English. There's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of shame. The stigma of needing help is real. They often feel like failures. It's very alienating for them. So yeah, everything that you said is so spot on, because you're right. People get into healthcare because they want to serve. And if they feel like they're not serving in the way that they envisioned, it causes so much stress, debilitating stress, lonely stress, which is why what you do is so important. What are some of the most effective strategies you've seen for addressing burnout, particularly for those who feel like outsiders in an English-dominated work environment?
Great question. There are many ways to address burnout, but in that particular field or situation where you're a non-native English speaker, and trying to be able to effectively communicate, a great tool would be, of course, mentorship. And mentorship and recognizing, of course, you're calling for medicine, you're calling for whatever profession it is. For me, I'm saying medicine because medicine is the profession that I'm in, but you're calling for your healthcare field. Don't lose that calling. Keep that. There's a book by Simon Sinek, which is Your Why. So hold on to your why. There is a reason you dedicated all this time to that field that you have chosen. So hold on to that. However, in order to overcome some of the nuances, it's important to connect. Now, connection is not just connecting with like-minded people who are around you, but also connect with those whom you would like to learn from, and it might not be easy depending on your natural personality. Some people are introverts and some people are extroverts. Some people, it's easier for them to ask for help, and in others, it's a little bit more challenging. But if you look around you and you see someone with whom you feel kindred spirits with, then you can pull them aside and explain to them your situation. Like, hey, I'm trying to learn how to deal with the nuances of the language here. Is it okay if I practice certain statements with you? When I say this, can you explain to me why this appears offensive? Can you explain to me just the little nuances? And this is not something for anyone to feel completely ashamed, because even like I said, I'm from Jamaica and I've seen my father. He had to deal with the same issue. He worked in the legal field. He worked with the law. And I'll give you a crazy example. In our Jamaica, we would say, like, oh, you're such an idiot. And it's just like, we're just laughing and say, like, that was idiotic what you said. But we'll just say, oh my God, you're such an idiot. Da da da. And he translated that, like, from our patois to English when communicated with someone. And oh, it did not go over well.
Oh no.
And so you can see how, and the person was completely offended. But us in our native patois, we laugh at that, like, oh, you just laughed at me. So just little things like that, just saying, like, okay, this is how my culture, this is what we would say. However, I noticed that when I said that, this was the reaction. Can you kind of explain the nuance of what it is? Because there are terms that in standard English means one thing, in American culture means completely different. In the professionalism, it means something else, but it's the exact same word. Like, how are you to know unless someone explains it to you, right? So I think connecting with someone whom you trust, most importantly, and as a mentor, can help with that nuance. Now, that's a specific tone and that's a specific example that would bring burnout and stress to a non-native healthcare worker. Now, if you are having burnout and stress and it's not related directly to the communication and you're having burnout, I would say one thing that you can do is, importantly, find out what are things that are important to you that you have started to neglect doing, right? So, for example, in order for you to go on this journey, these years and years, there are things that you did that relieved your stress prior to starting on this journey in medicine. You might have been a writer. Maybe you like doing poetry. Maybe you like to draw. Maybe you liked to sing, play an instrument, read non-medical books or journals. And I'm being specific because a lot of us, we start to throw some of these things that made us humans, that made us personable, we throw them away, right? So if you start and you recognize that you're in deep in that zone and you're unhappy and you're feeling frustrated, but you don't have an outlet, pull back and say, what is it that I loved to do that I found myself that I have stopped doing all these years because I felt like I had no time? You can always make time and make a priority. Put together 10 minutes to read your favorite book. Put together 10 minutes to doodle and draw if there's something that you liked to do, and find that passion that you had prior to going on this journey, and to ensure that you put together time to do that. And it's part of self-care, it's part of personal care, it's part of your mental health. One of the other things that's important when you are in burnout, and for those in medicine, you understand this. You are now in that state where your brain is in its fight or flight mode, and you have to break that cycle. So you have now moved from the high functioning prefrontal cortex portion of where you can sit and think and organize your thoughts. And you're in this reptilian portion where by all means, I just need to survive. I need to survive. I need to survive, right?
Yeah.
Especially when that anxiety gets higher and higher. You have to break that mold. And some ways of breaking it is by some of the things that we talked about, which is you move into the tactile portion of life. So things that you can touch or things that invoke the senses, smelling, seeing, tasting, touching, feeling. You tap into those to help to break that reptilian cycle that comes on with that heightened sense of burnout. So if you are finding yourself as a non-native English speaker having a day where it's just no matter what you say or do, it just seems like everything's against you, take a few minutes, pause, and tap into things that invoke your senses. Do you need to listen to a song that just makes you feel calm, comfortable, or boost your spirit, boost your self-esteem? Do you need to take some breathing exercises, listen, smell something that really goes back into that part of your brain that makes you feel calm, makes you feel confident? You have to just find ways to break that cycle and boost that confidence, bring you back to a state of calm, bring you back to a state where you know that you are in control. So any of those are
Mhm.
some ways to help.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you. You definitely gave some very effective strategies on how to address it. Now, as we wrap up, if someone is listening and they feel like they're on the brink of burnout,
Mhm.
what's one small step that they can take today to feel less overwhelmed?
One small step that I think is recognize that burnout is a way of pulling control away from you. And a small step to pull the control back is doing an audit, do an energy audit. And this is something that I talk about a lot. Look and write down what are the activities that you're doing and with whom are you interacting during those set period of time. How are you feeling during that time? What's going on? And document, is it draining energy or is it invoking energy? So are you feeling more energized when you do said activity, or are you feeling drained of energy when you do it? Are you feeling energized when you're around said person, or are you feeling drained of energy? The more you do that audit, you can start to now remove things that takes away energy and try to invoke things that brings energy. Now you can start limiting time around people who pull energy from you and spend more time with those who bring energy to you. So those are some small, quick steps I mean, it does not necessarily mean that you will overcome burnout within that
Love it.
immediate time, but it's a small way for you to start to find that control when you start recognizing these patterns, and little by little, you use those as some first steps to pulling back control, to getting your energy back, because that's one thing that happens with burnout. You lose your energy, you become cynical, and you lose your passion for your work. So that helps to bring the energy back. Those who are around you that pulls energy away, you're no longer going to be around them. So you're going to be less cynical. And then you start doing things that invokes more energy, then you find your passion will come back for what it is that you're doing.
Love it. Oh, that's a great actionable step that people can start taking today if they do feel like they're on the brink of burnout. So thank you. Okay, so Dr. Beckford, where can people find you online?
Absolutely. I am very active on LinkedIn. So if you'd love to connect and be part of my world, I would absolutely love a connection with you. I'm Dr. Tamara Beckford on LinkedIn. If you are a high achieving female and you feel like, hey, I would love to be able to overcome burnout, and I feel that I'm really on the brink of burnout, I would love to pull back that control so I can get the joy, peace, and meaning back in my life, then I'd love for you to connect with me on my page, Your Caring Docs /thrive. That's URCaringDocs.com /thrive. I'd love to connect and we'll talk and see if I'd be able to help to support you on your journey away from burnout.
Awesome. And both of those links are in the description box below. And also, if you are a non-native English speaker in healthcare and you feel like you need some additional support, not necessarily with burnout, however, if you're feeling frustrated because of the language barrier, we do have a free community available through my virtual academy. And the link for that is in the description box below. So thank you very much for tuning in, Dr. Beckford. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you for all that you do. You are doing very, very important work.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to share with your community.
No problem. And thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Take care.